Fraser, thanks for your time today. Let's just get a few facts and figures out of the way. First off, how big is the ASEAN economy?
So it's big. In short, it's $2.4 trillion if you put the 10 ASEAN economies together. And just to put that in perspective, that's the seventh largest economy today. But not only is it big, it's growing very fast. Its growth rate's only just behind China and India. And it's also a remarkably stable region. We have often this concept of the region as being high growth but high risk. And a lot of that stems from the Asia financial crisis. But in fact, if you look at the data, this is not only a high growth region, but a very stable, at least in terms of economic growth terms, region as well.
What's driving that growth rate at the moment?
Well, when you think about what drives growth, there's really three things. There's adding more people to the workforce, and that's been a big driver of the growth of many different countries across ASEAN for a very young working age population. The second thing has been urbanisation, so taking people particularly from agricultural jobs into urban jobs. And for countries like Indonesia, that's been a massive driver of productivity. And then the third bit is around improving efficiency within sectors. And that third bit is the cylinder which I think ASEAN could push a lot harder in the future.
Of course, ASEAN's moving to the ASEAN Economic Community. How significant will that be in its development?
It is significant, and it's very poorly understood. So this ASEAN Economic Community, it's not going to be another EU. It's not going to be a single currency. It's not going to be free flow of people. But what it is intended to be is a single integrated trade and production zone. And the end goal of this is by 2015 to have this complete. It won't be complete by then, but there has been significant progress to date. So we've seen a virtual elimination of tariffs across most ASEAN countries. We've seen a number of free trade agreements formed with other important trading blocs. So this is all really positive progress. The gaps are primarily in the service sector, where progress has been far less strong compared to goods sector, and also on things like non-tariff barriers. So the fact in ASEAN we have 4 different halal food standards, for example. So it's really a work in progress, but the impact could be significant. When we look sector by sector, we're seeing things like automotive, electronics and other sectors. This could be worth more than 20 to 30% just in terms of production efficiency. So it matters, and it's really important that Australian companies properly understand it.
Well, I do want to move to Australia's involvement in ASEAN. How significant is that, our trade with ASEAN nations right now?
Well, if you look at the high level, you think pretty good, right? Our trade's been growing very strongly, and it's at a particularly high level. But when you unpick that, it doesn't look so rosy. A lot of that trade so far has been in commodities, so a lot in oil, a lot in wheat, some in aluminium, etc. And there hasn't been a broader-based trade with ASEAN. And secondly, if you look at foreign investment, foreign direct investment coming from Australia to ASEAN, it's still really, really low. We actually invest more in New Zealand than we do in ASEAN, which seems kind of crazy when New Zealand's a country of around 4 million people, and you've got ASEAN, which is a region with over 600 million people. So there is a real upside opportunity for Australian companies to get more involved in the growth story in this region.
Is there a reason why we haven't taken advantage of that growth?
I think there's probably a few things. I think probably the biggest one is there's some long memories from the Asia financial crisis. And I think then a lot of Australians came out to this part of the world and many got burnt in the process. So I think there's that driver. I think the second driver has really been that the Australian economy, domestic economy, has been very good. And so there hasn't been the same impetus until recently to start looking in an earnest way to outside Australia. And I think that the third reason has really been that Australian companies in the past have probably adopted a somewhat naive approach in some cases to how they think about operating in the region, and that has led to troubles down the track.
What are the specific, I suppose, if as specific as you can be, are the opportunities for Australian business? What sort of business would prosper in ASEAN nations?
Well, I think there's 3 main areas to think about for Australian companies. The first is around this ASEAN economic integration. And now that's going to create this single trade and investment zone. And I think that creates a lot of interesting opportunities for Australian companies that want access to the broader region. It also creates some interesting partnership opportunities with local companies that are looking to expand to other parts of ASEAN. And ASEAN is dominated by family-owned businesses. And so if Australian companies can partner with them, that's an interesting opportunity. So that's number one. Number two is around urbanisation. Roughly 90 million people are going to join cities across ASEAN by 2030. And this is going to lead to a huge amount of demand for things like food, and which Australia is well placed to serve. It's going to lead to new skills and that education services where Australia is well able to serve. And there's going to be huge infrastructure demand. So roughly $7 trillion is going to be needed in infrastructure to 2030. And there's a lot of opportunities for Australian companies in those sectors to take advantage. So that's the second one. And then the third one is really around technology. This is a region that is incredibly tech-loving. It's the second biggest Facebook market in the world in ASEAN. Jakarta is the Twitter capital of the world. And a lot of these technologies are starting to enter the business sector. And it's going to play out very differently here because of the opportunity to leapfrog. Because in many countries, they don't have bricks and mortar, so they can switch to technologies such as mobile banking. But also because of the fact that this is a very geographically fragmented location. And so any technologies that can overcome barriers of distance will be important. So Australian companies in the technology field should be really thinking about what role they can play in this technology story in the region.
I suppose the opportunities are there, but how do you get started? What's the secret, I suppose, of getting started in ASEAN?
That's always the challenge, right? You see the big picture, it looks great, you see $2.4 trillion economy, but then when you break it down, you see a lot of the barriers. I think that there's no simple answer to this one. I think the first thing is you need a patient approach. I've often said that sometimes Australian companies in this region think of this as like a 2020 game of cricket. In reality, it's more of a test match. So you need to be patient, you need to build the relationships, particularly with these family-owned businesses that dominate the economic landscape here. So I think that's the first important thing. And then I think the second thing to really keep in mind is not copying the Australian playbook. So some Australian companies have come over to the region and just tended to copy and paste largely what they've done in Australia. But this is a very different region in terms of not only economic context but regulatory context. So understanding how you can adapt that business model to fit this very different circumstances is going to be very important for Australian companies.
And of course, international trade is the elephant in the room of any international trade, of course, is the underlying issue of potential corruption. How should Australian business deal with that?
Yeah, there is this view that you have to play by local rules, and that may mean lowering your governance and transparency standards outside Australia to operate effectively in these markets. I would actually challenge that notion. I think that is changing very quickly. We've already seen the anti-corruption drive in China. We're seeing across ASEAN the same kind of focus starting to happen. And this is not just in the government sector, but increasingly in the private sector. There's a whole lot of transparency standards coming in the natural resources area across many countries here, but also in governance standards that are linked to an ASEAN common stock exchange. So I think all of these factors will start to really, hopefully, increase the level of governance in this part of the world. And I think Australian companies will be well served by maintaining their high transparency and governance standards that they adopt in the Australian market when they operate in this region.